One rule, just one, never open that door. But nobody ever told her why dime, until the night it started talking back. He raised her alone. He protected her fiercely. But the one secret he buried in the basement was about to destroy everything he built. Midnight, a sound rises through the floorboards. A voice, faint, familiar, and it is coming from the one place she was forbidden to go. She was never supposed to come this far. But curiosity is louder than fear calm. And tonight, she is done staying silent. The rule is broken. The door is open. And the truth waiting in the dark is about to change this family forever.
If you have ever kept a secret to protect someone you love, you already understand what is about to happen inside this house. And before we go any further, if stories like this one keep you up at night in the best way, hit that like button and subscribe because the ending of this story will stay with you long after the video ends. Daniel Bennett had exactly one rule in his house, and he had never once broken it himself. Never, under any circumstances, was anyone to open the basement door. Not during birthday parties, not during thunderstorms when the power went out and the flashlight batteries were kept, ironically, in a drawer just 10 feet from that very door. Not even when 9-year-old Lily Bennett, his only daughter, begged to store her bicycle down there because the garage was too spidery. The answer was always the same, delivered in the same calm, unshakable tone. Not that door, sweetheart. Never that door. For most of Lily's life, the rule had simply been part of the furniture of her world, the way some houses have a squeaky third stair or a room nobody uses. She had grown up believing, the way children believe the things adults tell them without evidence, that the basement was simply dangerous. Old wiring maybe, or a broken step, or black mold that made your lungs hurt. Her father was overprotective in 100 small ways. He checked the locks twice before bed. He never let her walk home from school alone even though it was only 4 blocks. And he flinched, almost imperceptibly, every single time a car with a certain kind of engine rumbled past their house. Lily had learned not to ask about the flinching. She had learned there were things her father carried that he did not want her to carry too. Their small town of Maple Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did, which sometimes amounted to the same thing. It was a town of church bake sales and Friday night football games, of porch lights left on for wandering cats, of a single blinking traffic light downtown that everyone still called new even though it had been installed a decade ago. It was, in short, the kind of place where a secret as large as the one Daniel Bennett carried had absolutely nowhere safe to hide, and yet, somehow, for 8 years, it had. The Bennett house sat at the end of Larkspur Lane, a 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and a porch swing that Daniel had built the summer before Lily was born, the summer before everything changed. Neighbors who had lived there long enough remembered a different version of the house, warmer, louder, filled with music from an old record player and the laughter of a young couple who seemed impossibly in love. They remembered Sarah Bennett, Daniel's wife, a school teacher with a laugh that could be heard from 2 yards over. And they remembered the night, almost 8 years ago now, when Sarah simply stopped being seen. The official story, the one whispered over fences and traded in hushed tones at the grocery store, was that Sarah had died in a car accident on the old highway outside of town on a rainy October night, just months after Lily was born. Daniel never spoke of it. He wore his wedding ring for 3 years after, then quietly stopped, and nobody had the heart to ask why. He raised Lily alone, worked long shifts at the hardware store he eventually came to manage, and slowly, painstakingly, built a life that looked, from the outside, like quiet, contented grief. He was a good father. Everyone in Maple Hollow agreed on that. Attentive, patient, endlessly gentle with his daughter, except for the one rule that made no sense to anyone who did not know the whole truth, and nobody did. There were other small strangenesses too, the kind that only add up when you finally have the full picture to hold them against. Daniel bought groceries for a household of 3, always had, even though the town believed there were only 2 mouths to feed in that house. He renewed a subscription to a mystery novel book club every year and left the books in a bag by the basement door on the 1st of the month, the old copies gone by morning. He hummed, sometimes a tune Lily didn't recognize, low and unconscious, while he cooked dinner, a tune that would have been instantly familiar to anyone who had ever heard Sarah Bennett sing while grading papers at her kitchen table years ago. And every October, on the anniversary of the night everyone believed had taken his wife, Daniel took a single day off work, disappeared into the house with the curtains drawn, and emerged the next morning red-eyed but somehow lighter, as though he had spent the night mourning and celebrating the same impossible thing at once. Lily had noticed all of it, in the scattered, half-formed way children notice things they don't yet have the language to question. She simply hadn't known, until now, that all those small strange threads led to the very same door. Lily's curiosity, which had been dormant for years, first stirred to life on an ordinary Tuesday in October, almost exactly 8 years to the week since her mother had supposedly died. She was doing homework at the kitchen table, half listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost mistook it for the pipe settling. A voice. Not words exactly, more like the shape of words, muffled by wood and distance and time. It seemed to come from beneath her feet, rising up through the floorboards the way heat rises from a stove. She froze, pencil hovering over a half-finished math problem, and listened. Nothing. Just the refrigerator, the wind outside, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. She told herself she had imagined it. Children imagine things all the time. Monsters under beds, footsteps in empty hallways. But that night, lying in her room with the moonlight cutting pale stripes across her comforter, she heard it again, clearer this time, unmistakably human, unmistakably rising from the basement. It did not sound like a stranger's voice. It sounded impossibly, achingly, like something she had heard only in the handful of home videos her father kept in a shoebox on the top shelf of his closet. Videos of a woman with chestnut hair and a laugh like wind chimes, holding a baby that Lily now understood, with a jolt that went straight through her chest, had been her. She did not tell her father what she had heard. Some instinct, some old and wordless intuition, told her that if she did, the rule would only tighten around the house like a fist. Instead, she began to watch. She watched the way her father's hands trembled slightly whenever he walked past the basement door. She watched the way he checked the padlock every single night before bed, testing it with a small, private tug that he probably did not realize anyone noticed. She watched him disappear down those stairs sometimes late at night when he thought she was asleep, carrying a tray with 2 plates instead of 1, and returning 20 minutes later with both plates empty. Her best friend, Emma Torres, who lived 2 streets over and had opinions about everything, was the one who first said out loud what Lily had been too afraid to think. They were sitting on the Bennett porch swing on a Saturday afternoon, and Lily, unable to hold it in any longer, told Emma about the voice. "Maybe it's a ghost," Emma said, with the casual confidence of a 10-year-old who had recently read several books about haunted houses. "My cousin says old houses always have ghosts in the basement." "It's not a ghost," Lily said, though she could not explain why she was so certain. "Ghosts don't need 2 plates of dinner." Emma's eyes went wide. "Your dad brings food down there?" Lily nodded slowly, the pieces of a puzzle she had not known she was assembling beginning, for the first time, to suggest a shape. "I think," she said quietly, "there might be someone living down there." Emma leaned back on the swing, chewing thoughtfully on the end of her braid, the way she always did when she was working through a problem that felt bigger than the 2 of them. "If someone's living down there," she said slowly, "then your dad isn't hiding a monster, he's hiding a person, and people only get hidden when somebody out there wants to hurt them." It was a startlingly grown-up thought for a 10-year-old, and it landed in Lily's chest like a struck bell, ringing long after Emma had gone home for dinner. The idea, once spoken aloud, could not be unspoken. It burrowed into Lily's mind and refused to leave. She began searching, quietly and carefully, the way children search when they have learned that some questions get you sent to your room instead of answered. She found the shoebox of old photographs and home videos in her father's closet. Pictures of her mother pregnant, glowing, laughing at the camera, pictures of her parents dancing in this very kitchen. A video, shaky and warm, of her mother singing to a newborn Lily in the exact spot where the basement stairs now sat, sealed and forbidden. She found, tucked beneath the false bottom of an old cigar box in the garage, a single rusted key wrapped in a strip of faded cloth, hidden with the kind of care that told her it mattered. She also found, in a folder of old newspapers her father kept for reasons she had never questioned, a clipping from 8 years ago. The headline was brief and clinical: "Local woman critically injured in highway collision. Investigation ongoing." Not deceased, injured. The word sat in Lily's chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything she thought she knew. That night she did not sleep. She lay in bed, running her thumb over the rusted key she had taken from the garage, listening to the house settle around her, waiting for the voice to rise again through the floor. When it finally did, soft, wordless, unmistakably real, she rose from her bed with a steadiness that surprised her, padded barefoot down the hallway, and knelt in front of the basement door. She could see a thin line of warm light glowing beneath it, could hear, now that she was close enough, the faint murmur of a voice humming something that sounded almost like a lullaby. She had the key in the lock, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it could be heard through the wood, when her father's hand closed gently but firmly over hers. "Not that door," Daniel said, his voice raw in a way she had never heard before. "Please, Lily, not yet." "Is Mom down there?" The question came out of her in a rush, all at once, 8 years of unasked questions crashing through the dam she had built without realizing it. "Dad, is Mom alive?" Daniel sank down onto the hallway floor as though his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him up, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and cracked open in a way that frightened her more than any locked door ever had. The truth, when it finally came slowly, in pieces, the way truth often does when it has been buried for a very long time. 8 years ago, Daniel explained, he and Sarah had discovered something they were never meant to find. Evidence that his business partner at the time, a man named Victor Holloway, had been laundering money through the small construction company they had built together from nothing. Sarah, always the braver of the two, had wanted to go to the authorities immediately. Daniel, terrified of what Victor might do, had wanted to wait, to gather more proof, to protect his young family first. They had argued about it the very night of the accident. Victor Holloway had once been Daniel's closest friend, the best man at his wedding, the person who had loaned him the money to buy his first set of construction tools when Daniel was 24 and full of more ambition than capital. They had built Bennett and Holloway contracting together from a single pickup truck and a handshake, and for years it had felt like the kind of friendship that could survive anything. That was precisely what made the betrayal, when it finally surfaced, so difficult for Daniel to accept not just the crime itself, but the years of trust that had made the crime possible in the first place. Sarah had found the discrepancy almost by accident, cross-referencing invoices for a school she volunteered at that the company had done work for, noticing numbers that didn't reconcile no matter how she turned them. She had brought it to Daniel quietly, at their kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and Lily now ate breakfast every morning, and the two of them had spent that entire night going through boxes of old receipts, watching a friendship they'd built their whole adult lives around quietly reveal itself as something else entirely. It had not been an accident at all. Sarah's car had been run off the old highway deliberately, in the rain, by a driver who was never identified but whom Daniel knew, with a certainty that lived in his bones, was connected to Victor Holloway. She had survived, barely, broken and unconscious for 11 days. But the trauma to her head had left her with severe memory loss, seizures triggered by stress, and a fragile, fluctuating grip on reality that doctors could not promise would ever fully heal. Worse, Victor, upon learning that Sarah had survived, had made it chillingly clear through intermediaries that a woman who might one day remember what she'd seen was a liability that needed to disappear, permanently, if necessary. So Daniel had made an impossible choice. With the help of a small, trusted circle, a family doctor willing to falsify the record, a lawyer friend, and his own grief-numbed determination, he had let the town believe Sarah had died. He had held a quiet funeral for an empty casket, worn his grief like a mask thick enough to fool even himself some days, and brought his fragile, recovering wife home to the one place he could keep her safe and hidden. The basement of their own house, reinforced, soundproofed as best he could manage, and locked against a world that wanted her erased. For 8 years he had lived a double life, grieving publicly, loving secretly, raising his daughter with a rule he could never fully explain, all while quietly, patiently working with a retired detective friend to build a case against Victor Holloway that would finally make it safe to bring Sarah back into the light. "I didn't lie to protect a secret," Daniel told Lily, tears finally breaking free down his face. I lied to protect her life, and I didn't tell you because you were a little girl, and little girls talk, and if the wrong person ever heard even a whisper that your mother was alive, it would have gotten her killed. I hated every single day of it. I hated watching you grow up without her in the light. But I would rather you hate me for the rule than live in a world without her at all." Lily's hand was still on the key. She looked at her father for a long moment, feeling something enormous and complicated settle into place inside her chest. Not just anger, though there was some of that, and not just joy, though there was more of that than she had words for, but something larger that held both at once. Slowly, deliberately, she turned the key. The basement, when the door finally swung open, was nothing like the damp, spider-webbed dungeon Lily had imagined for years. It was small but warm, lined with soft yellow lamplight, a narrow bed neatly made, shelves of books, a hand-cranked radio, and dozens of drawings taped to the walls. Crayon suns and stick figure families and, Lily realized with a fresh wave of tears, drawings that matched almost exactly the ones she herself had drawn as a small child and left lying around the house, somehow smuggled down here and treasured. And in the corner, rising slowly from a chair by a small reading lamp, was a woman with tired eyes and chestnut hair threaded with gray she should not have had yet. A woman who looked at Lily the way people look at miracles they had stopped believing were coming. "Lily," Sarah Bennett whispered, her voice thin from disuse but achingly familiar. The exact voice from the old home videos, the exact voice Lily had heard humming through the floorboards for weeks. "My girl, look how big you've gotten." There are reunions that happen in an instant, and there are reunions that unfold slowly over hours, both parties relearning each other one careful piece at a time. Lily and Sarah's was the second kind. Sarah reached out first with a question rather than an embrace, asking softly whether she still hated broccoli, whether she'd learned to ride a bike without training wheels, whether the small scar above her eyebrow, the one Sarah remembered from a tumble off the porch steps as a toddler, had ever fully faded. Each answer Lily gave seemed to fill in a piece of the 8 missing years, and each question felt to Lily like proof that somewhere beneath the floor, through all that silence, her mother had been keeping track of her the whole time, hungry for every detail Daniel brought down to her in careful, loving reports. Sarah's hands, when she finally reached for Lily's, trembled the way a person's hands tremble after holding something in for far too long. She traced the friendship bracelet on Lily's wrist with one finger and asked who had given it to her, and when Lily said, "Emma, from next door but one," Sarah smiled and said she remembered. Emma's mother from church potlucks before, and marveled quietly at how an entire decade could pass, and somehow the small kindnesses of a town kept repeating themselves in new hands. They sat together on the narrow bed, while Daniel stood in the doorway, unable to stop crying, and Sarah told her daughter, gently and honestly, everything that 8 years of silence had not allowed. She told her about the accident, about the fear that had shaped every day since, about how she had listened to Lily grow up through a ceiling, memorizing the rhythm of her footsteps, the pitch of her laughter, loving her fiercely from a distance that felt, some nights, like its own kind of dying. But secrets, even carefully kept ones, have a way of finding cracks. 2 nights after Lily discovered the truth, a black sedan with tinted windows rolled slowly down Larkspur Lane and parked across the street from the Bennett house, its engine idling in the dark long after any reasonable errand would have ended. Daniel noticed it from the kitchen window while washing dishes, and something cold and immediate settled into his stomach. The specific, practiced fear of a man who had spent 8 years watching for exactly this. He recognized, even at a distance, even after all these years, the silhouette of the man who stepped out of the car, leaner now, grayer, but unmistakably Victor Halloway. It turned out that Daniel's retired detective friend, working quietly for years to build a case, had finally gotten close enough to Victor's financial records to spook him, and Victor, sensing the walls closing in, had grown desperate enough to do something he had avoided for 8 long years. Come looking for the loose end he had never been able to confirm was truly tied off. A single anonymous tip, likely from someone in Victor's own crumbling organization looking to save themselves, had reached him. Sarah Bennett might still be alive. What followed was the longest night of Daniel Bennett's life. He moved through the house with a calm born of pure adrenaline, locking every door and window, pulling Lily and Sarah down into the basement not as a prison this time, but as the only shelter he had, dialing his detective friend and the police with hands that would not quite stop shaking. Victor, arrogant and cornered, did not wait for daylight or subtlety. He crossed the street, climbed the porch steps two at a time, and pounded on the front door with a fury that rattled the old windows in their frames, shouting Daniel's name into the night. Daniel met him on the porch alone, refusing to let this final confrontation happen anywhere near his family, his body positioned squarely between Victor and the front door like a wall built from 8 years of quiet, accumulated resolve. Victor's face, illuminated by the porch light, looked older and more hollowed out than Daniel remembered. A man who had spent a decade running from a truth he had never quite managed to outrun, and for a strange moment Daniel almost felt something close to pity beneath the fear. "You should have let it go, Daniel," Victor said, his voice low and shaking with something between fury and desperation. "I gave you 8 years to disappear quietly with your money and your silence, and instead you kept digging." Daniel did not flinch. "You took my wife from her own life for 8 years, he said. "I was never going to let it go. I was just waiting until it was safe enough to fight back." Whatever Victor had come intending to do, he had not accounted for the particular strength of a man who had already survived the worst thing he could imagine and rebuilt an entire life, brick by secret brick, around protecting the people he loved. Words were exchanged, accusations, threats. The ugly unspooling of a decade-old betrayal finally dragged into the open air. But before Victor's simmering desperation could turn into something worse, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the night. Neighbors, awakened by the shouting, had already called for help. Daniel's detective friend, who had been quietly watching the house for exactly this possibility, arrived only moments behind the first patrol car. Victor Holloway was arrested that night on the porch of the house he had spent 8 years trying to erase, charged eventually with attempted murder, conspiracy, and a decade of financial crimes that unraveled once his organization saw him fall, faster than anyone expected. Sarah Bennett, for the first time in 8 years, stepped out of that basement and into the actual light of morning, blinking against a sun she had almost forgotten the true color of, her daughter's hand held tightly in her own and her husband's arm steady around her shoulders. In the days after the arrest, word moved through Maple Hollow the way it always did, fast, half-accurate, and impossible to stop. Neighbors who had once whispered sympathetically about poor Daniel Bennett raising that girl alone now stood on their porches in open-mouthed disbelief as Sarah walked down Larkspur Lane for the first time in 8 years. Sunglasses on against a brightness her eyes had nearly forgotten, Lily's hand wrapped tightly around hers. Some cried, some simply stared. The town's grief counselor, who had once helped organize a memorial garden in Sarah's name at the elementary school, found herself in the strange position of helping the same community process a homecoming instead of a loss. A problem everyone agreed they were more than happy to have. The months that followed were not simple. Sarah had to relearn a world that had moved on without her. New phones, new neighbors, a daughter who had grown from an infant into a whole, opinionated, curious person while she watched from below. There was therapy, and there were hard nights, and there was the slow, careful work of a family stitching itself back together in full view of a town that had grieved a woman who was, astonishingly, standing right in front of them at the grocery store. But there was also, every single day, something that had been stolen from all three of them for 8 long years. The simple, ordinary miracle of being together in the same light without a locked door between them. Lily still thinks sometimes about the version of her childhood where she never heard that voice through the floor, where she grew up believing the story everyone else believed, never questioning the rule, never turning that rusted key. She understands now that her father's silence was never about keeping something from her. It was about carrying something so heavy for so long that he nearly broke under the weight of it alone, all so that one day she might get to have a whole family instead of half of one. And she understands, too, that her own stubborn, unstoppable curiosity, the very thing that used to get her in trouble for asking too many questions, was the thing that finally cracked open 8 years of darkness and let her mother walk back into the sun. The basement door still stands at the end of the hallway in the Bennett house, though these days it stays open more often than not, painted now in a cheerful shade of blue that Sarah picked out herself, filled with sunlight from a new window Daniel installed the week after Victor's trial ended. It is no longer a place of secrets. It is simply a room in a house full of people who love each other, who fought harder than most families ever have to, and who finally, after everything, get to be exactly what they always should have been, together, in the light, with no rule left to keep. Emma, for her part, became something of a local legend at school for having guessed the truth before anyone else. "I told you it wasn't a ghost," she reminded Lily at least once a week for the rest of the school year, with the smug satisfaction only a 10-year-old detective could carry. Daniel eventually testified at length during Victor's trial, and Sarah, once cleared by both doctors and a very careful legal team, gave a quiet statement of her own that finally, officially, closed the case that had shaped every day of the family's hidden life. Neither of them ever described those 8 years as easy, and neither pretended the scars had fully healed. But they agreed, whenever Lily asked, that they would make the same impossible choice again if it meant she got to grow up with even the chance of a whole family waiting for her on the other side. If this story moved you even a little, remember to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one, and share it with someone who believes, the way this family finally learned to believe, that the truth, however long it takes to surface, is always worth the wait.